Hey, it's Joe Solari here with the Business of Writing, and today's guest is Chris Fox. How you
Hey,
doing,
thanks for
Chris?
having me.
Great to have you here. We're going to talk about a project that you've been working on for quite some time. I've known about it because, at Archer's Rest, you were showing us some of the stuff you were working on, and I think I heard about it originally from Jonathan Yanez that you guys were like sneaking off to play it at one of the 20 Books conferences.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we've been playing for a few years now.
Okay. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about, first off, who you are and what you write, and then we can get into the actual project that's on Kickstarter right now.
Sure. So for your audience, they probably know me best from books like 5,000 Words Per Hour or Right to Market, maybe Six Figure Author. I write science fiction and fantasy. That's where the money comes from. And my flagship series is called the Magitech Chronicles, which is epic space fantasy. Think dragons tearing apart starships, gods blowing up planets, that sort of thing. And the project on Kickstarter that I'm working on is a role-playing game set in that same universe where I've got the novels.
Cool, cool. Now, I've seen you speak about the research you do when you get a book series started. I'm sure you've always, since you were, a young role-playing game player, that wanted to do something like this, but I can't imagine you just jumped into this and did it. I'd love to hear how you came about developing the idea of doing a game off the books and the kind of the behind the scenes work to actually get the game to work.
Okay, so some of the best advice I can give anybody watching or listening to this is find the intersection of your unique skill set. And this is my unique skill set. I've been GMing these games since I was, if you can believe it, 6 years old. I've been playing since the very early 1980s and have so many thousands of hours into various games. And I saw a whole bunch of systems when I was growing up, and we're talking dozens of various gaming systems. So over time, I started figuring out which ones worked and which ones didn't. And eventually a lot of theory came into it, and I started crafting my own system. And so from 18 to 43, I've just been tinkering, 25 years.
Mm. Wow. So this has been something that's kind of like some people talk about writing a book. They've been working on it for 20 years. You've
I
done
just
that with.
didn't think it. I just didn't think it could be monetized. But then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm an Amazon best-selling author. Why can't I monetize this? And I figured
Mm.
I'd give it a try.
Well, and now that you're on Kickstarter, I would say it's probably nowhere near as big as the book market, but I mean, there's such a significant market for fantasy role-playing games.
Altered Carbon, it just finished up, and I didn't look to see what their final number was, but the last time I checked, it was like $300,000
Yeah.
for their Kickstarter. So if you have the right property and can get it in front of people, there's a voracious audience. It's actually growing, not shrinking, thanks to things like
Mhm.
Critical Role.
Right. I mean, they've kind of made it a platform people go to. And I know there's a lot of tabletop gamers that this is where they go to first, including stores are looking for new products on Kickstarter. I was out talking to the guys at Guardian Games in Portland, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that one was on Kickstarter." And I mean, half the stuff in the store starts on Kickstarter and then gets into the traditional distribution.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of the other game companies that had competing products, because I was studying their Kickstarter pages, would offer bundles specifically aimed at game shops, like I'll sell you 10 copies at a reduced rate kind of thing. So I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting because I would never have thought to do that, it being my first Kickstarter, and I'm not knowing the industry as well.
So on that topic, specifically to the Kickstarter, what did you do? Well, let me ask this question. Why did you decide to go through Kickstarter?
Kickstarter is a massive tool for visibility. It's a great way to get yourself in front of a lot of people very quickly, especially if you're willing to advertise aggressively. So I'm talking YouTube ads, I'm talking Twitter ads, I'm talking Facebook ads. I'm putting yourself out there because instead of selling a book, a $5 book, you're asking people, please help us, which is
Mhm.
always better than asking them to buy something, and they can contribute what they want. And that could be a
Mm.
dollar, that could be $1,000. And in one contributor's case, that's $5,000 for my Kickstarter. So people can kind of pay what they're interested in doing. And that means regardless of your situation, if it looks interesting, they're going to do something at some level. And the
Mhm.
price difference is so massive, where I'm used to, okay, I'm selling a 99-cent, book to get you into my funnel. I'm going to lose money on that. Whereas when I'm advertising for a Kickstarter, I might spend $20 in ads and get like $400 in contribution.
Mhm. What's your average contribution or pledge on Kickstarter?
$112 right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think mine when I did the audio project was 35, and a male told me the other day with her she was like 70. So I think that's the other thing for authors to think about. Like, how many books do you have to get to $130 in revenue?
Mm-hmm.
And the other question I'd have for you is looking at, because actually in Kickstarter you can see all this stuff. Um, how's the breakdown of people that are backing your project? How many are coming from Kickstarter? How many are coming from your mailing list? How many, can you kind of give a breakdown of those numbers?
Yeah, so early on, most of it was my mailing list and or Facebook, because I advertised very aggressive on those two platforms. Because I knew on Facebook, lots of people knew me and hopefully would contribute to the Kickstarter, and that worked.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as it was funded, I then turned ads on Reddit, because people want to see that a Kickstarter is funded before they invest. It's like the cardinal rule. So as soon as I knew that I could do that, I started advertising on other platforms, and those are cold sales. I'm not telling anybody about the game. They've never seen it before. Many of them don't read fiction at all and don't care that there's novels. They're just seeing a new role-playing game with a dragon tearing apart a starship, and they're like, what's that?
And then do you have a percentage how many are just coming right from Kickstarter? Because I know they show those numbers.
They have like 4 or 5 different search areas that they come from, but if you can compile it all, I'd say close to 20%.
Mm.
But I suspect the vast, vast majority of it is from external advertising. So if you just
Okay.
went to Kickstarter and you put a Kickstarter up there, you're probably not going to find a ton of cold sales. And I don't think it's going to sustain your Kickstarter. It's definitely icing on your cake, though.
Sure. No, so what I found with mine was, because I did a lot of Facebook advertising, and I did a heavy amount of cross promotion with author newsletters.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got involved in doing shout outs to other people on Kickstarter. So when we were doing our updates, we would share. But I ended up with about 30% was just organic people finding me on Kickstarter, and complete strangers spending significant amount of money with me. So, I mean, it's a great place to find a new audience.
And for everybody, if you already have probably some super fans, this is a way super fans can give back. You can have a tier where you're like, okay, I'm going to sign a complete set of the Magitech Chronicles novels, all 7 of them. If you contribute $500, and I'll send that to you. And as an author, that means you bought 7 books from Amazon at cost, and you took the time to sign and ship them. And you could have a super fan who's thrilled to get that and will put it on their shelf until the end of time. And you're actually making some capital with which you can, produce the next book.
Mm. Well, and I was surprised, out of the folks that I could recognize off my mailing list, how many were maniacs on Kickstarter, like spending like you're trying to scratch out $2.99 from them, and they're dropping $1,000 a month on Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a product for them, how can they do it?
Right. And that's where you got to think about the economics of it and why I chose role-playing games. Like, lots of people are like, where did Chris go? Well, I realized that, what is Amazon going to look like in 10 years? Think about what it looks like today. Think about what it looks like 5 years ago. And now extrapolate 5 or 10 years what that's going to look like. And what do you think your profit margin is going to be as the average author, even with a large backlist? If we don't find ways to expand into other markets and make our IPs greater than just an ebook series on Amazon, the day will come when that's not enough for us anymore.
Well, and you're not doing a service to your intellectual property either, because I've said it multiple times, we're in this golden age of content creation where there's massive demand and there's going to be more. So why not figure out if it has a place in these different markets? Whether it's, we typically go to traditional stuff like movies, or, I want to get a TV series, but there's these other things that are now, as you've proven, if you're prepared to put the work into it, you can do 100% your way.
Mm-hmm. The problem I would argue, like against my own case, is the massive amount of work and capital that is required. I have put so many hours into this game and so much of my own personal money to bring it to life. And sure, I cannibalized a bit. I used my existing cover art as a lot of the internal art for the role-playing game. And I did all my writing myself, so it wasn't me paying somebody else to do it. But I still had to pay for layout and quite a few other things. And if you're not prepared to dump a ton of money into it, it's probably not going to succeed. And if you do dump a ton of money into it, it may not.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind sharing kind of what the numbers look like on that?
Can you be more specific about what numbers you
Well,
mean?
like, so to bring a game like this to fruition, so there's, like you said, there's been a lot of your hours that you probably haven't even quantified that. Not to say you wouldn't have done that anyhow, but more so like figuring like how much money you've spent in actual game development, artwork, getting stuff done, how much money, to that you've spent, say, on just the Kickstarter, getting that launched, giving people an idea of kind of what those budgets would be like.
Sure. I would say I invested probably something like $30,000 directly into the role-playing game, into various expenses.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, I spent lavishly. You didn't have to spend nearly that amount of money. You could do it on a much more shoestring budget. I see people do it very inexpensively, but I wanted the best artwork. I wanted full color interior artwork, hardcover books. I mean, I wanted the whole 9 yards,
Mm-hmm.
and I got it, but it's very expensive to do it that way. So $30,000-ish. For
Mm-hmm.
setting up the Kickstarter, I paid to have a video made and I used visuals I already had. So that was very, very inexpensive to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that once you kind of have those assets that you had for the game, that kind of saves. Whereas most people, like with Richard Fox, when he did his graphic novel, it was kind of the inverse. It was like they had to go spend some extra money to get the drawings done by the artist they were going to use to give people an idea of what that was going to be. And that was probably one of their biggest costs up front. Whereas to your point, you had that, that bigger cost just in the production of the game. Now, when you were doing that, was it because you wanted, why was it that you'd spent that money? Were you looking to sell it elsewhere, or was it you just felt to give it the right feel on Kickstarter, you needed to have $30,000 invested in it?
I'm a lifelong gamer, so in the same way that when I came onto the scene with writing to market back in 2014, any cover would do pretty much. Most people had terrible or mediocre covers were acceptable. And I said, no, you got to do it better. If you want to succeed, you need the best cover, you need the best blurb, and you need to write to market. It's the same thing with role-playing games. The vast majority of people that I see that are producing content aren't creating a fun game, a game that, like, have you played Cards Against Humanity?
I have not.
Okay, I bring that up because it's a fairly common game that a lot of
Yeah,
people
yeah.
know. It's really fun to play.
Mm-hmm.
You need a game that it just lends itself well to being played in that way,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be able to show people that. So there's so many moving pieces I have with this, and one of them is a YouTube channel where I'm showing actual gameplay so people can see that the game itself is fun. And I feel like that needs to be added to a project. So it's not just even the amazing artwork. The value proposition has to be there. When somebody reads a novel, they're going to spend an afternoon with it. When you get into a role-playing game, you've got to convince 5 other people to come every Saturday and play for 8 hours and learn the system and make characters and, and play it for a year. But if they're willing to do so, they'll pay $100 for the main book, and they'll buy source books at like 50 or $60 a pop.
Yeah. Well, and I also would say that the market's getting pretty mature on Kickstarter, and that, when people are looking and making a choice what they're going to back, there are some really beautifully illustrated games with great stuff, and they've gone to have supplementary materials made. And I mean, you could spend an hour on one guy's page just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling on all the material that they've created, especially if this is a game that they're on a second edition or supplementary material on. So yeah, I could see how, just to make sure that you're, not just looked over, you would need to spend that kind of money. So you had kind of, before we hopped on the call, you'd said there's, some lessons learned that you probably should share. And so it'd be great if you kind of talked about what you learned in, the process of getting ready for this.
Yeah, the first thing is the more lead time you have, the better. You can create a Kickstarter preview page, which I did not know. And so I just sort of cold went into it and created it. And if you have a preview page, you can say, hey, my Kickstarter is not going live for 3 months, but everybody who goes to that page is going to be added to a list that'll see updates. So you can start kind of building momentum. You could, go on podcasts to talk about it. You could build more of a launch plan. And because I've only been a dad for 8 weeks, I did none of that. I didn't have time to organize anything. So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to make the best Kickstarter page I can. I'm going to make the best video that I can. And then I'm just going to go live with it and see how it goes. Oh, excuse me.
Now, in your vision for this game, I'm assuming there is going to be supplementary materials and.
Yeah, I have the first dozen source books planned, and the material for most of them is like 80% written.
Okay. Because that's the other thing is it's just like writing. It's not a one and done thing. Like there's cumulative advantage you can build. You do this, let's say, your Kickstarter's funded. Let's say you don't make any more money past what it is. But on that next round, when you go and do that deal for the second edition or supplementary material, you'll be able to build on that base and work off of the fact that you've been successful in running a Kickstarter and delivering that material to those people, right?
That's the plan. And as I understand it, I can keep contacting everybody who backs. So when I do the next source book, and they all want source books for this, if you're going to shell out $100 to buy the main book for the game, you're excited when the supplements come out. So I'll message all those people to start with, and then you've got those built-in backers. And if the game is fun and you build the right kind of community, hopefully it spreads from there.
Well, that's one thing for authors. If you haven't done a Kickstarter, it is almost scary how much contact Kickstarter gives you with your backers. Like you have all their information. If you're shipping stuff, you're going to get their shipping details. And there's an expectation that you keep them updated as the project goes along. They want to know that, when it's funded, when you're getting close to stretch goals, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I have a rule of thumb where I don't go more than 3 days without an update.
Well, that's good. So now that you've been doing this for a couple weeks, or what, about a week, right?
Yeah, I think we're at 10 days.
Yeah. So you did. So you got 20 days to go. You're at 15,000. What were some of the things that surprised you?
That somebody purchased one of the RPG licenses right off the bat. If the project it's like backing an early startup in its very first stage. If the role-playing game is successful, that'll be an amazingly good investment for them. But if it fails and nobody plays the game, then they just spent $5,000. So I don't know. I suspect it was, an angel investor, somebody maybe I've done a favor for in the past who has an IP and wants to take a chance.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because that's interesting, because beyond, like, I know there's other folks that have taken their story world and they brought it to a role-playing game, typically by using somebody else's gaming system. In this case, where you've put all your work into this, you've got kind of two levels of intellectual property, right? You've got the actual story world, but then you've got the actual mechanics of this game. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, what I'm licensing to them is not my intellectual property, the Magitech Chronicles, but rather the system for the role-playing game. And so that allows them to skin their IP right over the top. So if you've got a wonderful science fiction or fantasy universe and you think it would work well with the system, you just slide it right over, and the mechanics are then modified to fit your universe and express your type of magic and the technology that you use.
I think that's really cool to see that you've got that kind of meta layer that you figured out there, where as authors see your success and they're like, geez, Chris, how do I do this? It's like, well, you can buy a license and wrap your stuff around it and go to it, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. If it is successful, I suspect a lot more people will suddenly be interested because then it works. It's been proven. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think anybody would do it during the Kickstarter. That surprised me.
Yeah, that I was very surprised at some of the things I saw with mine. It just complete strangers spending $500 with me, and I had nowhere near the kind of readership that you do. And I think the big takeaway from that is that you know there's these whole new markets that if you're prepared to take some risk and get out there and try it, you can continue to build your audience. And we haven't even talked about there'll be some follow through into the books.
Right. It's a cycle. So the books lead people to the game, which leads people right back to the books.
Mm-hmm. So now that you're kind of gotten to this point and you're seeing that it's working, what's your thoughts about how your business is going to be looking at intellectual property in the future? And does it change how you're going to be writing books and bringing books to market?
It just means executing the plan that I already had. I've been writing my novels in such a way that they tie directly into the sagas, the adventure paths for the role-playing game. So I kind of was already setting it all up, and now that I see that it's working, I'm just going to double down on that.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about maybe with some of that supplementary material that being tied to launches in the series?
I have, and I'm not sure exactly what that's going to manifest like,
Mm-hmm.
but I want them to be tied in directly. And so if you've got a Kickstarter running for an adventure path, which ties into a novel that's on pre-order and about to go live, it's my contention that the pre-order will probably help your Kickstarter and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how familiar are you with Michael Sullivan?
Very. He's the king of self-starting your own novels.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at the kind of money that he raises on Kickstarter and his process. I mean, it's very unique what, Michael and Robin have come up with, but it shows that if you really figure out your audience and what your audience wants, they're more than prepared to kind of fund anything. I mean, he typically is raising six figures on his launches.
Yeah, I think people want to help other good people. So if they see that you're a struggling indie author and you're writing good books, they want to help. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if they've read them and sort of invested themselves in the story. And fans are amazing. Like, it just blows my mind how much they give.
Mm. Well, and I think that that's part of it. I mean, you mentioned it yourself, how much of your childhood was wrapped up in playing games, right? And you think about, in fact, I was talking to Nick Cole about this because him and I are kind of similar ages. Like now there's this whole new market for this stuff because now we can actually afford this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, like the amount of money in this house in plastic figures is insane, right? And most of that happened after college, right? Because I just couldn't afford it when I was in high school. But then I had a job and I had money, and it was like, guess what? I still love to play that. And I had friends that would play Warhammer, and they just sucker me every time I walk in that store.
Yeah, I always thought, maybe we would grow out of it, and we just didn't. And since we didn't grow out of it, why not support our hobby?
Well, and we were talking about this in messaging, and I've got two 15-year-old boys that have now taken on the addiction. And so this isn't like, it's actually fun because we can throw a game together downstairs anytime, right?
Yeah, throw together some Necromunda or something.
Yeah, it's they're it's funny how it goes. I'm watching it, what I went through to their age, and they're just like, they'll sit in the back of the car and talk Warhammer lore for hours. Like and that doesn't take into the fact that they've got to be reading the books and online looking this stuff up because like they're
reading the codexes and they're buying the miniatures and they're finding the novels and the audiobooks. And I want to create Warhammer 40K, just my version.
Yeah. And to understand that it's what you're doing there is giving them that playground to do that, to learn and add into that that canon and play around with it is, I mean, that's really what like guys like us are. I mean, wish we could do it all the time, right?
We just want to spend more time in that world. And so if you can give us a ton of material and explain how the whole world works, and then give us a set of rules where we can make our own content within that world, you've hooked us, and we're going to stick with that forever.
Yeah. Well, I picked up a copy because I'm going to see my my two boys. They do play D&D, and I know they did a Destiny derivative of D&D, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was figuring, well, they got to try this game. This sounds like we're very close to that. So we'll see if we can get a game going here at the house.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So what other things have you thought about with your intellectual property, or has this just been a complete obsession? The role play.
You need to develop it piece by piece. So I would love to have a video game made, but I decided to wait. I've had a couple of companies approach me, but they want to make mobile games, and I'm more interested in doing like an isometric role-playing game like Baldur's Gate or Pillars of Eternity.
Okay.
So I'm going to wait until that comes along, and I may even do a Kickstarter for one of those at some point. Who knows? I mean, I've been a software engineer for many years. So eventually I'll expand into those areas, but my thought is the role-playing game is the pinnacle. If you look at modern science fiction and fantasy, almost all of that is rooted in role-playing game. And I would wager that the vast majority of fantasy and science fiction authors today probably played some flavor of role-playing game at some point. White Wolf's World of Darkness, Exalted, Shadowrun, Rifts, D&D, something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know that for a fact. Just talk, you go to these conventions and you hear people talk about that stuff that they used to do. And I think that is, you've said it so well in some of your presentations about, you as the avatar for the customer you're writing to. And I think that's why so many indie authors have been successful, is because they're writing the book that they wanted to find on the shelf that wasn't there. Right. And certainly, God, how many gamers have thought about making their own game, right?
But I would wager most of us.
Yeah. And now it's a possibility. Like it's a
real like you can have it
possibility.
printed on Drive-Thru RPG in the same way that we print on Amazon. It's so amazing to me that they'll send a hardcover copy of my role-playing game anywhere in the world, and I don't have to lift a finger.
Has there been any discussion? Where are they located out of? Are they in the U.S.?
They have a printer in the U.K. and they have a printer in the U.S. So if you're going anywhere else, it gets very expensive. Yeah. But you're passing that cost along to your audience. You're saying you guys are responsible for shipping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the other thing. I think most folks on Kickstarter understand that there'll be some kind of additional fee for shipping it, depending on what the product is. But I know with Mal, when she asked me about running her audiobook, I said, I thought I remembered you had like a card game. She's like, oh yeah, I made this card game because I used to hand it out at conventions. I'm like, you have to have that as one of your levels.
Do you want to know something really funny?
Yeah.
That's the level I backed at. I bought the Snark deck. So it's called Snark. That's the name of the card game for Mel's game, for Mel's universe. And I thought it was awesome. And so I backed at that level.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we were talking about it, it was just the idea of like, if you know that there's more people out there looking for games, and even more so card games, like that's a whole nother subgenre of gaming on Kickstarter. Like, why not pick them up and then give them that whole idea of like, oh, there's a world around this, or books, or because it is about building your audience, not just selling them a game, in my view.
Right. You want them to stick around however they do that.
Yeah. So what else would you want to talk about on the show as far as helping authors to understand either the role-playing piece or, if they're going to try Kickstarter?
For the role-playing piece, I would say don't feel obligated to make a game because you see other people doing it, because this is not like writing a novel. The costs associated with a role-playing game are way, way higher. So only come here if you actually really love gaming. For Kickstarter in general, I would say um, don't wait that long to get started. You can set the term of your Kickstarter. So if you want to make it 6 months instead of 30 days, you can do that. So take a look at it today, make an account, start putting together the pieces for your Kickstarter, think about rewards you'd offer. It's such a daunting project that I put it off for way too long, and I could have jumped on this a year ago or 2 years ago and already been making money with other projects.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I've been talking about Kickstarter for a couple of years now, mainly focused for authors that are trying to figure out how to raise money for their audiobooks. Right? I think it's a fantastic alternative to signing a deal where you lose your rights. But it's interesting. I've had a few people like, well, I would never do that. That it's almost like this concept of it's a dirty way to raise money. And it's like, no, you don't understand that there are people there that they see this as like a pre-order system. I mean, if you scam them and you don't deliver, then your life there is going to be real short. But this isn't even, while gaming is huge on Kickstarter, way bigger than audiobooks, it's nothing compared to technology on Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm. Technology is like the rock. I mean, there's so many millions of dollars getting invested in technology.
Yeah, and then you go in there and you look at like, okay, is it video technology? Is it, stuff to do with your phone? It's just crazy how much money is being raised by people that are really comfortable with backing and see, because they feel they're helping you succeed, right? Like,
yeah. I would sum it up like this. It's a super fan recruitment system.
And who doesn't want those? Right?
I have one of my tiers. I just sold the last one, so it's now sold out. I had 10 copies of an autographed hardcover book for $180 a pop, and they sold out like in the first week.
Yep. Well, and with Mal Cooper, this was a few years ago when I first started talking to her about some of the stuff that she was doing with merchandising. And she shared a story where she had done a limited edition art hardcover book. And one of the fans that bought it was like, I want the whole series. And he was, well, I haven't done that yet. Well, it's like, I don't care. I want the whole series. Right. And she figured out it was like $2,700. So, I've said this before. It's like, I think authors you get too small in your world. You don't think that like maybe a fan of yours owns his own jet. What they're prepared to spend is you don't understand their economics at all. Like,
or impact. So I try to think about it like this, and it's so hard as an author to value our own work. But if I ran into Tad Williams in a Kickstarter way and could get autographed copies of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and it cost me, $5,000, I would just fork it over without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
That was the kind of impact this author had on me as a kid. So if you are that to somebody because of the work that you've created, then they want to support you at that level, and they're going to place whatever they get from the Kickstarter in a place of honor, probably on their shelf.
Yeah. And the other thing I've seen, are you familiar with Pat Flynn?
Uh-huh.
So he's run a couple Kickstarters for his books, but where he's used it is to figure out kind of the cap of what people are prepared to pay. Mm-hmm. So that was how he kind of did a test market on him having a conference. It was like, I'm going to see, you can buy VIP tickets as part of this launch. Guess what? He sold a bunch of VIP tickets. Well, guess what? Now I got to have a conference. The other one I saw there was, it was like $10,000 for spending a day with him.
And I want to point out, this is entirely kind of cult of personality. This is the audience that he's built. This is him interacting with his tribe. So it's not Kickstarter as the tool. It's basically just him leveraging his fame, really.
Sure, but it's a way to figure out, is there a market for that, right? So
it's a great market test, because if it doesn't fund, you've lost nothing.
Yeah. And in that case, if you put something in there like, hey, do you want to, if you're writing archaeological thrillers, do you want to go on my research project with me? It's $20,000. Nobody signs up. it's no skin off your nose,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, but if you do, like, what a great opportunity for you to find the super fan and not only make that meaningful experience for them, but then to be able to use that to sell more books, right? Like, hey, here's me and my fan traveling all over Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I would do that in a
well,
heartbeat. Like go on a trip with like, Dr. Robert Schock. That'd be great.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's really cool is that you see more and more of that kind of stuff where you can get those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, I think a lot of authors, they don't they don't place the value on their work like you said.
It's hard. I struggle with it, but I mean, the Kickstarter was an eye opener. Seeing it fund in the first 2 hours was just insane. Like, I honestly didn't know if it would fund in 30 days, and so seeing it happen in 2 hours just blew my mind.
Mm. Well, something to keep in mind, it doesn't matter the size of the project. I've observed it and I've heard many people talk about it, is like the middle parts, these doldrums, and then the last 48 hours, you may see it do exactly what it did in the first 48 hours.
That's the plan. So I've got a lot of promotion set up for the last 48 hours, and
Yeah.
then I'm just doing daily ads. So I'm spending
Hmm.
like, I don't know, maybe $80 a day in ads, and I'm getting like $400 to $600 in backing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. But I know with mine, it was like the wind just kind of went out of the sails 15 days in, and I was like, what's going on? And then it just, in
I think
the
the
last,
stretch goals are important. So I just hit my first stretch goal, which people push to do. We're going to hit the second one pretty soon, which they're very excited about. So it's firing your fans up about the next stretch goal and just pushing, pushing, pushing until you get it.
and what are those stretch goals?
So the first one is Tom Edwards is making miniatures. He's already completed and painted the first one. So we'll have 5 miniatures and we're giving the files away. So just the STL files. I don't have a lot of overhead,
Hmm.
but they can use those like Hero Forge or print them on their 3D printer.
Hmm.
And then from there, it's more content for the book. So an adventure path called First Contact. Beyond that, there's a necrotech supplement and a demo tech supplement and all sorts of other stuff they're interested in.
Cool, cool. And what, when you went into your Kickstarter, was there already a playing base, like people that were playing the game already, or?
It's tiny, but yes. So we have a Facebook group with like, I want to say 60 people in the development, and then like maybe 600 people in the actual Magitech Chronicles group. And so it's that core of people. So a few of them are running games. We've been working on mechanics for a very long time.
Mhm.
And then I've run games at like, 20 books to 50K and Archer's Rest and a few other conferences. And it's kind of those people.
Well, and to put this into context for somebody watching this, the rules for this you can get for free.
Oh yes, and it'll always be that case. Although I'll point out, you can also get the rules for Dungeons and Dragons free. So this is not like me inventing anything. Pathfinder does the same thing. They realized if you put the rules online, then when players are playing your game, they can quickly and easily Google stuff. And if you
Mhm.
don't do that, they have to look in a book, and fans are like, "Why am I playing this 1980s game that doesn't have its own website?"
Mhm. But where I'm coming from is like, even though that like you created this thing and you put it out there for free, that helped you to build an audience that was prepared to pay money. Because I know that I'm the kind of person that, yeah, even if I could get the rules for free, I still buy the books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've
Likewise.
got, and I mean, we've got stacks and stacks of army books in this
But I figure
house.
if you're a 16-year-old right now who can't afford to do that, and World Anvil is the only way you can do this, I'd rather you play my game for free and I get nothing, and that you have a good time. And maybe someday that person will buy a book from me, and maybe not, but it didn't cost me anything.
Well, if it plays out like we've talked about, and this has got the decades long tail, this could be really seeing it in 10 to 15 years, where those people are Magitech fans, and now they can finally buy the 10th anniversary edition you come out with.
Yeah, that'd be great, and that's what I'm hoping to build towards.
Yeah. Well, big plans, they stir men's souls, right?
Indeed.
All right. Well, why don't you kind of share with people where they can find you, and we'll of course we'll put the link to the Kickstarter in there. Do you have any? Have you looked at anything as far as after it closes and continuing to sell the game?
I have. It'll be almost exclusively through Drive-Thru RPG, although I will sell it from my website as well.
Okay, great. And you want to just kind of do your shameless plug at this point?
Sure. So if you're an author, you probably want to check out either chrisfoxwrites.com, or you can just Google Chris Fox and you'll see my YouTube channel. Tons and tons of free content. I've got like 500 free videos for you there. If you are not an author and you like science fiction and fantasy, I have a role-playing channel called Chris Fox RPs, and also the MagitechChronicles.com website.
Great. Well, man, it's good to chat with you. I'm trying to think when I might see you next, because I'm not going to be at Archer's Rest.
Maybe Vegas? Are you going to be at 20 bucks or no?
Oh, I'll be at Vegas. Yeah, I'm speaking there. Are you doing Nink?
No. I will be at 20 bucks because it's on my coast, but Nink is just too much of a time investment.
Too far.
Yeah.
Well, then that'll probably be it.
All right, man. Then I guess I'll see you in November.
Yeah, see you in November. We'll be talking before then.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, good having you on.
Hey, thanks.